Hey guys, tonight we step into the Roman world, into a city whose name you may not find carved on triumphal arches, but whose story lingers in whispers and fragments. Imagine marble streets shining faintly in the evening light, fountains spilling water into stone basins, and markets closing with the usual haggling between merchants and customers. On the surface, life hums with order, discipline and prosperity, the things Rome loved to boast about. Yet beneath those polished stones, the earth itself is plotting. And yes, if you were thinking of moving there, you probably wouldn't survive the homeowners association, or the ground giving way beneath your feet. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments below. I always love seeing how far across the globe these bedtime journeys travel. Now find yourself a cozy seat or a soft bed, let your mind begin to unwind, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The city in question lies in one of those places the Romans adored: fertile soil, rolling hills, and easy access to trade routes. Grain grows tall in nearby fields, olive trees spread across the hillsides, and villas glimmer with tiled mosaics. Roman surveyors, meticulous with their measuring rods and wax tablets, praise the site for its abundance. They likely mark milestones along the road that leads here, those squat stone cylinders, declaring distances in both miles and Roman paces. It all looks stable, permanent and eternal, the very qualities Rome prided itself on. But permanence like marble can crack. Scholars today still argue whether this city was built over a honeycomb of underground caverns, or on land softened by hidden springs. Roman engineers were geniuses with aqueducts and roads, but even they sometimes missed the dangers lurking below the soil. Imagine cisterns or sinkholes forming silently year after year, until one night the ground simply decides it has had enough. By day the city thrums with the sounds of the empire. Legionaries clank in armour as they patrol the gates. Vendors shout prices for figs, garum and bread hot from clay ovens. Children dart between columns, dodging the disapproving looks of toga-clad elders. A temple rises proudly in the forum, its steps worn by countless feet, while priests sacrifice doves and mutter prayers to Jupiter. If you had wandered here, you'd have felt the confidence of Rome, the sense that everything is catalogued, controlled, and neatly squared into columns of numbers and decrees. Rome adored order almost as much as it adored conquest. And yet there are hints, small and unsettling, that the earth beneath is less reliable than the marble above. Wells collapse, suddenly forcing hurried repairs. A stable sinks unevenly, tilting its roof like a drunk after too much wine. Superstitious neighbours whisper that the gods are restless, that Neptune shakes the ground when displeased. A quirky tidbit tells us that some Romans carried tiny amulets carved with protective symbols against earthquakes and floods charms, not unlike the lucky coins soldiers clutched on campaigns. Even the most practical Roman might secretly hedge his bets with a charm tucked into his belt. As dust settles, the forum glows with oil lamps. The scent of roasted meat drifts from taverns where men in russet tunics toast each other with cups of sour wine. Musicians pluck strings and tap tambourines, adding a rhythm to the night. In distant courtyards, women weave by lamplight, gossip flowing as smoothly as the shuttle through the loom. Families gather in atriums, water splashing in central pools, and dogs curl up near the hearth. The whole city exhales, winding down after another day. But beneath the chatter and laughter, some feel a faint vibration underfoot. Was it just imagination? Perhaps a wagon rolling past, or a tremor from far-off hills? Historians still argue whether the citizens had warning signs, strange animal behaviour cracks in walls, murmurs from underground, or whether the disaster arrived like a thief without a whisper of alarm. What we know is that ordinary routines carried on. Bread was eaten, prayers were spoken, dice clattered on tabletops. A city carried on its life unaware that life itself was perched on a fragile crust. Rome, of course, loved to boast of its ability to tame nature. The Colosseum could be flooded for naval shows. Aqueducts spanned valleys with mathematical grace. Roads carved straight lines through forests. Yet here was a place where nature bided its time, tolerating Rome's presence only briefly. The citizens may have admired their fine mosaics decorated with dolphins and vines, without realizing the ground beneath those tiled floors was preparing to swallow them whole. Picture a market stall as the owner carefully stacks amphorae of olive oil. Each jug is heavy about 25 kilograms or 55 pounds, and he grumbles about the effort. He jokes with his neighbour that at least he doesn't have to carry bricks like the poor builders. The neighbour laughs, adjusting the balance of his own goods. Little do they know that within days, maybe even hours, their carefully stacked lives will be unstacked in a single instant. Some scholars suggest that local myths already contained warnings. Legends of caverns that yawned open without warning. Stories of rivers that vanished underground only to burst forth elsewhere. Perhaps the people shrugged as humans do thinking. Disasters happen elsewhere, not here, not in their familiar streets. Or perhaps they trusted Rome too much, believing the empire's might extended even into the trembling earth. Either way, the city remained where it was poised on fragile ground, beautiful and bustling like a dancer spinning on thin ice. As the lamps burned low and families prepared for sleep, the city dreamed the same dreams it had always dreamed of prosperity, of security, of tomorrow. But tomorrow would not come, not in the way they imagined. Tonight the ground was already shifting its weight, sighing like a giant turning in uneasy slumber. The city had no idea that its final hour had begun. Night drapes itself over the city with the unhurried certainty of a curtain falling across a stage. Oil lamps flicker along the marble-paved streets, their light making ripples on polished columns and catching the bronze studs of doors. Shadows stretch across the forum where merchants have packed away their wares, and the chatter of the day dwindles into scattered voices lingering in taverns. The scent of smoke, roasted meat and damp stone fills the air. It feels like any other evening in the Empire, routine and reassuring. But reassurance can be a trickster, especially when the ground beneath your feet is quietly rearranging its plans. Inside homes, families settle into their rhythms. A matron in indigo stirs a pot of lentils, muttering about the day's market prices. Her husband, still grumbling from hauling amphorae, reclines on a wooden couch with a cup of watered wine. Children chase each other around the atrium pool, earning half-hearted scoldings before being herded toward bed. In another courtyard, a young man scratches a quick note onto a wax tablet, promising to visit his friend tomorrow. He places it on the shelf, not knowing it will be the last message he ever writes. The city hums with quiet rituals. Bakers prepare tomorrow's loaves, kneading dough by lamplight. Soldiers return to the barracks, loosening belts and joking about the dull assignment of guarding gates where nothing ever happens. Priests extinguish temple lamps, their prayers fading into the night air. The routines are comforting, almost hypnotic. If history has taught us anything, it's that disaster loves to arrive precisely when people are most convinced of normalcy. You probably wouldn't survive this unless you have a talent for sleeping through earthquakes and waking up outside your own bedroom. One mainstream historical fact underscores this complacency. The Romans built their cities with confidence in permanence. They inscribed dedications in stone, carved their victories on arches, and engineered streets to outlast generations. Even in frontier provinces, they acted as if their order would last forever. Yet archaeologists have uncovered entire towns erased by floods, landslides, and volcanic eruptions. Nature occasionally reminded Rome that eternity has an expiration date. Still, the people here seem unaware. A tavern buzzes with laughter, wine sloshing in clay cups as men in saffron tunics play dice on the table. A slave brings roasted fish sprinkled with herbs, the scent mingling with smoke from the hearth. Someone tells a bawdy story and the crowd roars. In the corner, a man whispers of odd tremors in the earth, but his companions wave it off. After all, what's a little shaking compared to the steady beat of Roman life? A quirky tidbit comes to mind. Romans sometimes interpreted strange natural events through augury, reading the behaviour of birds or the entrails of sacrificed animals. If an owl screeched at night, it was considered an omen. Imagine a poor augur here hearing the faint rumbles beneath the soil and wondering if he should recommend an extra chicken sacrifice in the morning. Would it help? Probably not, but at least it would give the neighbours something to gossip about. As night deepens, the streets grow quiet. A lone watchman makes his rounds, the iron tip of his spear tapping softly on the stones. Dogs bark and then fall silent, ears twitching at sounds too faint for humans. A cart creaks as it's pulled into a storage yard, its wheels leaving grooves in the damp earth. The stars glitter faintly through a haze of smoke, but mist drifts in from the hills, thickening around corners like an advance scout for the disaster to come. In one villa, a wealthy merchant boasts about his success, reclining as servants bring figs and honey. He brags about trade routes stretching to Gaul and Hispania, about the steady stream of coin that jingles in his coffers. He doesn't notice the faint cracks creeping along the courtyard tiles. Nor does he hear the faint groan of shifting soil beneath the cellar. To him, the night is as secure as his ledgers. Historians still argue whether the citizens noticed these subtle warnings, or whether human optimism drowned out the hints. After all, denial is cheaper than moving house. Elsewhere, a group of children giggles while sneaking out to watch the temple torches flicker against the columns. They dare each other to climb the steps and whisper prayers to Mars. Their laughter echoes in the night air, innocent and oblivious. Tomorrow those same steps may not exist, swallowed like a careless word lost in conversation. But tonight the temple stands proud, its marble gleaming faintly like a beacon of permanence. The earth gives a subtle shudder. A few chickens squawk in their coops' wings, flapping nervously. A donkey brays and stamps, tugging against its rope. The vibrations fade quickly, dismissed by weary citizens as thunder or wagons on the road. People return to their beds, pulling woolen blankets tight against the cool air. Dreams drift over them, dreams of harvest, of trade, of journeys yet to come. They do not know their city's story is about to end before those dreams can ripen. And so, the lamps burn low, smoke curls lazily above rooftops, and silence spreads across the streets. The city breathes deeply in its sleep, unaware that the ground beneath it is drawing a final breath of its own. Beneath the calm surface, the soil is restless, coiling like a serpent preparing to strike. The people rest, but the earth does not. By dawn, the map of the empire will have one less name erased not by enemy hands, but by the indifferent shifting of stone and soil. The first hints of unease slip into the city, not with a roar, but with a murmur. The earth beneath the marble streets seems to sigh, subtle enough that only the most attentive notice. A jug rattles against the wall in one kitchen. A dog growls low in its throat before curling tighter into its straw bed. In the forum, a statue tilts slightly, its base no longer perfectly aligned. None of these alone would be alarming, but together they are like the faint prelude to a song the citizens have yet to hear. Morning dawns grey, the kind of sky that makes everything look a little flatter and colder. Farmers arriving from outlying fields complain that their paths feel uneven, their carts bouncing more than usual. In the marketplace, a baker grumbles that flour sacks have split open as if shifted roughly in the night. It's the mules, someone says, shrugging, but the mules stamp nervously, two ears twitching at sounds from underground. Animals, it seems, are more attuned to the whispers than their human masters. A mainstream historical fact helps us frame the moment the Roman world was familiar with earthquakes. Entire cities in Asia Minor had crumbled under tremors, and records note tremors felt even in the heart of Rome itself. The empire often rebuilt swiftly, determined to show resilience, but memories of sudden ruin haunted every province. For people living here, such stories may have drifted in from afar, warnings easily dismissed as problems for other towns, until the ground itself began to offer its own commentary. The whispers grow bolder by evening. Small cracks creep across plaster walls like delicate lines on old parchment. In a tavern, a pitcher topples from a shelf, shattering across the floor, and the owner curses the clumsy slave he blames. Outside, a group of soldiers patrols the streets, their sandals clicking steadily, but even they glance uneasily at the paving stones shifting beneath their feet. A centurion mutters that the gods are displeased, and his comrade jokes that maybe the earth simply wants a drink of the cheap wine they carry. Humour masks unease, as it so often does. A quirky tidbit floats among the gossip some locals whisper about a subterranean river, said to flow like a hidden snake beneath the town. Children repeat tales of voices rising from wells, warning of danger. One grandmother swears she heard a chorus in the wind last night. Men crying beneath the earth, she insists. Her neighbours shake their heads, but they lower their voices when speaking of it. Folklore fills the spaces science has yet to explain, and rumour clings more tightly than reason when tremors ripple underfoot. Night returns, and with it another round of subtle quakes. This time the lamps sway, spilling oil across a tiled floor. In the barracks, helmets clatter from shelves, and a young recruit jolts awake, heart racing. He whispers a prayer to Mars, clutching his amulet. Historians still argue whether such omens were widely recognised or brushed aside as mere inconveniences. Perhaps the truth is that people noticed but chose not to believe. Belief, after all, makes a danger real, and disbelief can buy one more night of peace. The forum itself, pride of the city, begins to show signs of stress. Stone slabs no longer align perfectly. Water pools unevenly in corners. Priests attempt to calm fears by performing extra sacrifices, scattering incense and chanting louder than usual. The smoke rises, curling into the misty night, as if trying to placate not just the gods above, but whatever force lurks below. A crowd gathers, nodding solemnly, comforted by the ritual, even as the ground beneath their sandals vibrates faintly. Meanwhile, merchants complain that their goods are harder to keep upright. Amphorae tip in storage rooms, grain sacks lean against walls that bow outward slightly. A potter discovers several of his jars cracked down the middle, the clay unable to withstand the shifting shelf. He curses the kiln, blaming his own craftsmanship, but deep down he suspects otherwise. Perhaps Fortuna has abandoned us, he mutters, though he still sets out the jars for sale the next morning. Business even in shaky times must go on, and yet amid unease life persists. Couples stroll under the lamplight, musicians strum lutes in courtyards and taverns fill with chatter. The quakes remain too subtle to halt the inertia of routine, but they plant seeds of doubt growing slowly like weeds in the mind. Citizens find themselves glancing down at the stones more often, listening for sounds that should not be there. They laugh but nervously when a cup trembles on a table. They scold children who joke about the ground breathing. In one dramatic moment, the earth offers a louder warning. During a feast, as guests recline on couches with cups of wine, the floor rumbles hard enough that platters slide and goblets spill. Candles flicker, and a slave drops a tray with a crash. The host leaps up, trying to make light of it. Even the gods envy my cooking. Laughter ripples through the hall, though thinly. Later, when the guests leave, they do so with unease knotting in their stomachs, unwilling to admit aloud that the ground beneath them is restless. By dawn, rumours swirl like mist. Some say the gods are punishing the city for arrogance. Others blame hidden caverns collapsing under the weight of stone. A few practical minds insist it is nothing unusual, just the earth settling. But in hushed corners a darker thought takes shape. Perhaps the city itself is doomed. And though no one dares say it openly, the cracks in the walls mirror the cracks forming in their certainty. The whispers of the earth are no longer deniable. They are the voice of inevitability, muffled but insistent. And the citizens, whether they choose to believe or not, are already walking on borrowed ground. The city sleeps lightly, though the ground beneath it is anything but steady. Deep under the marble foundations, forces stir that have little concern for Roman architecture or municipal pride. The inhabitants, however, remain blissfully unaware, their dreams filled with the usual clutter of ancient urban life, market haggling, military parades, romantic intrigues, and the occasional worry about whether one's neighbour is plotting to build a balcony that blocks your sunlight. Hey, zoning disputes are timeless. As night stretches its cool hand over the streets, a sense of fragile normalcy lingers. The lamps are nearly burned out, the last dice players mutter curses at Fortuna, and in taverns mugs are stacked upside down, signalling the end of revelry. Somewhere a rooster decides that midnight is an acceptable time to practice his aria. The sound is met with a grumbled curse, proving that even in antiquity, livestock could be as frustrating as traffic. The aqueducts hum softly, carrying water into the city's fountains and bathhouses. This is not just quaint Roman design, it is engineering brilliance. A mainstream historical fact, Roman aqueducts could carry water across vast distances, using only a slight gradient over kilometres to ensure constant flow. The citizens of this particular city, perched on fertile ground, rely heavily on those streams of water to bathe, cook, and keep their public fountains babbling like civic ornaments. They trust these aqueducts, for Rome's authority is built not only on swords but also on infrastructure. Still, the earth has its moods. A faint tremor shakes a few cups off tables, startling a pair of stray dogs that had been gnawing bones in an alley. They yelp, dart, and vanish into the shadows. The tremor is small, the kind that makes people roll over in bed and tell themselves it was nothing. In a city accustomed to the occasional shudder, the thought passes as quickly as wine down a throat. But tonight each minor tremor is a rehearsal for something more sinister. In the forum the statues loom in silence. A bronze emperor raises his hand eternally to a crowd that is not there. The moonlight catches the folds of his toga, gleaming as though the metal itself knows drama is about to unfold. A quirky tidbit fits here. Ancient Romans sometimes believed that statues could sweat bleed or move as omens. Priests wrote down such events in their chronicles with absolute seriousness. If a priest were here now, he might swear that the bronze emperor's hand trembles just slightly, waving farewell to his city. Meanwhile, the governor lies awake. Reports of recent fissures outside the walls have reached his ears. Farmers whisper about cracks in fields, about goats refusing to graze in certain spots. Historians still argue whether governors in frontier or provincial cities truly paid heed to such rural superstitions, or dismissed them as rustic nonsense. Tonight our governor feels the tug of unease. He knows Rome expects order even when the ground itself rebels. He debates whether to order guards to patrol the city's perimeter for signs of change. Instead, exhaustion wins and he drifts into a shallow, troubled sleep. The tremors return, not strong not yet, but stronger than before. Tiles rattle on rooftops. An amphora tips over and spills olive oil across a storeroom floor, the scent sharp in the darkness. A pair of cats startled dart across the rooftops, their shadows flitting like spirits. Somewhere a child wakes and cries, but her mother soothes her with a lullaby, convinced that the sound of shifting shutters is nothing more than wind. Humans are experts at rationalizing what they cannot control. Down in the cellars, wine jars clink against each other with faint, eerie harmony. One might imagine the city's entire stockpile of vintages is toasting itself to farewell. The slaves tasked with tending storage look around nervously, but their overseer tells them to stop being dramatic. After all, Rome does not crumble because of a few bumps in the night. The man will be tragically proven wrong within hours, but for now his bravado keeps the workers steady. At the temple, the night watch priest notices the altar flame flicker wildly though there is no breeze. He whispers a quick prayer to Vesta, goddess of the hearth, hoping she will keep the sacred fire alive. He does not see the faint crack crawling along the temple floor, a jagged line like a sketch drawn by an impatient hand. If he had noticed, perhaps he would have sacrificed another goat or muttered another prayer. Or perhaps nothing would have changed, because sometimes the earth simply makes its own decisions. Above-ground shepherds camping just outside the walls feel the vibrations more keenly than city dwellers. Their flocks stir, bleating uneasily, crowding close as if sensing what humans refuse to admit. One shepherd points toward the city and jokes nervously. Perhaps the Romans are marching in their sleep. His companions laugh too loudly, for laughter has always been a shield against fear. Still, their eyes linger on the city's silhouette, wondering if the walls can protect against what comes from beneath. A procession of clouds crosses the moon, smothering its light. Darkness presses heavier than usual. Somewhere beneath the surface a groan echoes deep, resonant and ancient. It is the sort of sound that rattles bone marrow and makes even skeptics consider divine wrath. People stir, roll over and tell themselves it was thunder, though the sky is dry and still. Rationalizations work best when one is desperate for sleep. The night stretches on, and tension coils tighter. The ground is like a drum being tapped with increasing insistence. The marble, the frescoes, the amphitheatre, everything built with pride rests upon soil that shifts like a restless sleeper. Had any citizen walked the streets at that hour, they might have noticed cracks widening between stone's mortar powdering into dust. But the streets are empty, and the silence is misleading. Finally, as the night tips toward dawn, one last tremor ripples through the city. A vase topples in a wealthy home, shattering into fragments across a mosaic floor. The master of the house mutters in his sleep, perhaps dreaming of falling unaware that his dream and his walls are soon to coincide. The city itself takes a slow breath, though lungs made of earth have no pity. This is the moment just before history bends. The city, glorious and proud, lies on its bed of fault lines like a man on thin ice. The tremor's not the disaster itself, but the prologue written in subtle quakes, whispered groans and uneasy animals. Tomorrow's storytellers will say it happened in an instant, but here in the watchful hours of night the earth rehearses the collapse with patience. The dawn has not yet come, but already the ground prepares its hunger. The night after the great trembling, when the earth groans like a creature with a wound, the survivors gather at the edges of the hollow that was once their proud city. The ground is still warm, in places steaming, as though it has swallowed a feast too quickly. Smoke curls from fissures and stones roll loose with each tremor. Torches sputter in the damp air, and the people whisper, unsure whether they stand at the mouth of a grave or at the doorway to some underworld. They hold each other tightly, old neighbours who once argued over olive trees, now clutching hands as if kin. Children stare wide-eyed into the abyss, asking whether their homes will climb back out if they wait long enough. It is a foolish thought, but one of those sweet, fragile ones that only a child could dare in a night like this. Priests lift their arms and chant their voices thin against the expanse of emptiness. They invoke Jupiter, Neptune, even Pluto, as though any god might be persuaded to undo what has been done. Some say the earth cracked because the city grew arrogant, that too many coins rattled in temple coffers, and too many feasts stretched past midnight. Others mutter of omens, ignored ravens circling at midday springs, running dry goats, born with strange markings. Historians still argue whether such stories represent genuine observations, or the creative stitching of hindsight turning chaos into moral lesson. Whatever the case, the people are left with silence broken only by the hiss of settling stone. A mainstream historical fact offers some comfort. Ancient Romans often believed natural disasters were not random, but messages, puzzles sent by the gods. To them an earthquake was not geology, but a stern warning in divine handwriting. This belief shaped the response rather than rushing to rebuild survivors. sought rituals of appeasement, sacrifices of animals, the recitation of litanies. A quirky tidbit tells of one priest who swore the disaster came because citizens had cut corners in sacrificing a bull, choosing a scrawny animal instead of a fine one. Imagine an entire city erased because someone pinched pennies at the temple market. If that explanation feels absurd, it is, but absurdity has a way of filling gaps when truth hides. At the edge of the chasm, soldiers plant standards and call for order. Their discipline, forged in drill yards and battlefields, is meant to provide calm, but the sight of neat ranks beside such devastation only deepens the strangeness. The soldiers themselves whisper too. A centurion remembers the tale of the city of Helic in Greece, swallowed by the sea centuries before. He recalls Pliny's words about whole towns disappearing overnight, and mutters that perhaps they stand upon cursed ground. Another soldier, more practical, suggests building rope ladders to descend and search for survivors. Yet when a few daring men lower themselves, they return pale, speaking of collapsed streets, stagnant water, and the faint smell of sulphur. The city is down there, yes, but broken, twisted, unwelcoming. In nearby villages, word spreads quickly. Farmers leave their ploughs and rush to see. Some arrive carrying baskets of food, eager to share with survivors. Others come like vultures, eyes sharp for treasure that might be scavenged. Already whispers of looting, rise coins, jewellery, sacred relics buried but not beyond reach. The governor issues decrees against it, threatening punishment, but his voice feels small compared to the enormity of the ruin. It is like ordering the sea not to be wet. As dawn breaks, the devastation looks even stranger. What was once a grid of streets is now a patchwork of tilted roofs, barely visible through cracks, walls crushed upon walls. In one place, a column juts upright from the earth, like a desperate hand. In another, a statue's face peers upward, half buried, as if pleading. Birds circle warily overhead, refusing to settle, as though they too scent something uncanny. Survivors dig with hands, then with tools, pulling out the injured where possible, but most searches end in silence. No cries rise from beneath the rubble, only the hollow echo of stones moved in vain. In the city's forum, which lies now half caved into itself, the great bronze statue of an emperor, whether Trajan Hadrian or some other august figure historians still argue leans at an unnatural angle. To the people, it is as if the empire itself has toppled along with their homes. They kneel in prayer, though the emperor's bronze gaze offers no reassurance. The figure looms as both relic and accusation, a reminder that even Rome's symbols cannot withstand Earth's hunger. By evening, tents sprout like mushrooms on higher ground. Families huddle inside, eating bread that tastes of ash, drinking water that smells faintly of clay. Children fall asleep, clutching scraps salvaged from the wreckage, a doll missing its head, a wooden spoon, a sandal strap. Adults speak in hushed tones, debating whether to rebuild nearby or abandon the place entirely. One old man insists the gods will relent if they offer richer sacrifices. Another says the city is cursed forever, its name doomed to vanish from maps. And in time he is right. The site slips from memory, preserved only in fragments of story. A young scribe, seeing his neighbour's despair, sets about writing the day's events on wax tablets. His stylus scratches as he records times, names, gestures of bravery. Yet the wax is fragile and the tablets vanish before later generations can read them. Perhaps they were melted down for reuse, perhaps lost in some later calamity. What remains are the oral accounts drifting through years like smoke. It is why we know so little now, because fragile records burn faster than stone, and even stone crumbles when the earth decides to swallow. The hollow itself begins to fill with water as underground springs seep upward. Within weeks, a dark lake gleams where the city once stood. Fishermen test its edges, casting nets, whispering that the fish taste of iron. Some claim to see shapes beneath the surface, arches, stairways, a glint of mosaic. They cross themselves quickly, as if afraid of being pulled under by ghostly hands. In truth, lakes over buried ruins are not unique. Historians point to multiple sites across Europe where seismic activity or floods created such eerie reservoirs. Yet each case feels personal, uncanny, because a city beneath water is not merely lost. It is inverted, transformed into a mirror that reflects sky instead of streets. Even centuries later, travellers will pause by the shore and wonder what lies beneath. Some say the bells of submerged temples ring on stormy nights, others that lights flicker as though torches still burn in drowned halls. Children dare each other to dip hands in, claiming the water drags at their skin. A local superstition grows that to drink from the lake is to inherit the city's unfinished fate, a burden no one wishes to carry. And so the first generation of survivors drifts into the fog of history. They rebuild elsewhere, perhaps, or scatter to join relatives in distant towns. Their children tell stories of a night when the earth opened its jaws. Their grandchildren tell shorter stories, more polished, less detailed. Eventually, what remains is legend. The precise name of the city fades blurred by time, but the memory of sudden loss lingers weighty as ever. The ruins lie buried in silence, but when the first medieval peasants stumble across half-collapsed stones jutting from the soil, curiosity stirs once again. They do not see a city lost in an instant, they see convenient building material. Farmers pry up blocks once carved by Roman masons and drag them to patch cottages or line wells. Children clamber over mossy arches using them as makeshift fortresses in games that echo real wars of the past. Sheep graze unconcerned where senators once debated their hooves clicking on hidden tiles. Nature reclaims with indifference, and people adapt with the same calm practicality that always characterizes daily survival. Yet rumours grow. The peasantry whispers that the ground beneath them is cursed, that the earth swallowed a city for sins too terrible to name. When thunder shakes the valley, they mutter that it is the buried citizens calling out. Some even avoid ploughing certain fields, fearful that an iron ploughshare might unearth something better left untouched. It is both superstition and self-protection, a way to explain the inexplicable. A quirky tidbit emerges: a few medieval records mention local villagers refusing to build near ancient ruins because stones whisper at night. Whether that was metaphor or genuine belief, the unease lingers like a faint echo. Historians still argue whether these medieval communities preserved scraps of Roman memory or invented stories whole cloth. One camp believes oral tradition could have carried down tales of disaster across centuries, warped but still recognizable. Another insists that peasants of the 11th or 12th century knew nothing of Rome, seeing only strange stones and weaving myths to suit their worldview. Both possibilities remain, and neither can be proved conclusively. As monasteries grow in influence, monks enter the picture. Quill in hand, they copy fragments of ancient texts and comment upon them in margins. When they encounter vague references to a vanished city, they reinterpret them in Christian moral terms. To some scribes, the city's collapse is divine punishment for pagan decadence. One chronicler writes that the ground opened because citizens worshipped false idols and scorned the poor. This neat moral explanation fits medieval theology perfectly, regardless of whether it aligns with any geological truth. Meanwhile, relics multiply. An abbey claims to have unearthed a Roman chalice, though suspiciously it looks like a dented cooking pot. Pilgrims flock anyway, dropping coins into the donation box in hopes of sharing in the aura of mystery. Another monastery insists they safeguard a shield from one of the vanished legionaries, though the metal is so corroded that it could just as easily be a plough blade. Still, faith makes the ordinary extraordinary, and relics sell stories as much as they sell salvation. Poets and storytellers seize on the tale. A travelling bard might sing of a proud city that mocked the heavens, only to vanish in a single night when angels drew a curtain of earth over it. The rhythm of the verses matters more than accuracy, and listeners nod solemnly as if they have heard divine justice firsthand. Children repeat the verses while playing, and soon the myth is as alive as any saint's legend. Over time, the city shifts from history into morality play, standing as a warning that arrogance invites downfall. Yet there are always alternative interpretations. Some villagers claim druids cursed the city. Others suggest demons clawed it down. A few romantic souls imagine the city still exists underground, lit by torches that never burn out its citizens, carrying on life in hidden halls. That fantasy persists for generations, as if the missing people simply stepped sideways into another world. When miners later dig near the ruins, they sometimes report echoes or strange drafts fueling such beliefs further. It is half imagination, half geology, but wholly irresistible. Mainstream historical fact reminds us that medieval Europe rediscovered Roman ruins piecemeal. Towns sprouted atop amphitheatres, fortresses reused Roman walls, and farmers carted off marble as though it were ordinary stone. The same happened here. The missing city's traces survived not as monuments, but as recycled fragments. A carved column might reappear in a church doorway. A piece of mosaic could end up as flooring in a noble's hall. Rome seeped into the Middle Ages like pigment bleeding across parchment, indistinct yet pervasive. Through it all, the vanished city retains its aura. Monks debate theology, peasants whisper of curses, bards chant songs of hubris, and relic hunters dig eagerly. The truth slips further away with each new layer of invention, but the legend grows ever more secure. The city is no longer merely a ruin, it has become a symbol. For some it represents God's judgment, for others it embodies human fragility. For still others it is simply a good story to tell on long winter nights when fog presses against the shutters. And so the medieval imagination does what Roman paperwork failed to do. It keeps the city alive, though in forms utterly transformed. The citizens are no longer flesh and blood, but phantoms. Their voices rise not in Latin, but in whispers carried by wind. Their story belongs not to history alone, but to faith, folklore, and fancy. By the time the Renaissance arrives, the city is firmly entrenched in cultural memory, not as it was, but as people want it to be. The silence of the earth becomes fertile soil for myth, and myth in turn ensures the lost city is never truly forgotten. By the time the Renaissance dawns, curiosity has grown restless, unwilling to accept the blank silence left by earlier chroniclers. Scholars now dressed in velvet gowns rather than woolen cloaks sit in candle-lit studies and spread maps across desks polished by years of anxious elbows. They see the Roman Empire as both a warning and a muse, and the story of a lost city swallowed in a single night is irresistible. It has all the elements a Renaissance mind craves: antiquity, drama, mystery, and perhaps even divine justice. They begin to hunt for clues in forgotten manuscripts in crumbling ruins, and in the whispered tales of peasants whose grandfathers' grandfathers claimed to know something of the disaster. Mainstream history provides a crucial detail here. During the Renaissance, humanists began rediscovering texts from antiquity, sometimes copying them by hand in their studies, sometimes printing them on the new press that spat out books faster than monks ever could. They unearthed fragments of Pliny, Tacitus, and Livy, and through those texts they attempted to reconstruct the grandeur of Rome. Yet when it came to the lost city, they found almost nothing, just a gap, a silence, a hole in the carefully woven tapestry of empire. And as often happens when scholars find a hole, they rush to stuff it with imagination. A fringe detail surfaces in their debates. Some claimed that beneath the soil of northern Italy or southern Gaul lay caverns filled with statues of soldiers perfectly preserved as if turned to stone mid-stride. These supposed stone armies were offered as evidence that the earth had opened, swallowed the city, and fossilized its people as eternal witnesses. Of course, historians still argue whether such stories were deliberate fables meant to draw pilgrims, or simply misunderstandings of ordinary geological formations like stalagmites resembling cloaked figures. In Renaissance salons, poets recited verses imagining the city's fall as a kind of morality play. They pictured senators arguing at marble tables, so caught up in their disputes over grain tariffs or temple dedications that they ignored the trembling underfoot. One line, still copied in a surviving manuscript, declares pride sat upon their brows, and so the ground claimed them for its feast. It is melodrama, yes, but melodrama with a purpose to warn the living not to repeat the arrogance of Rome. Renaissance writers adored weaving such allegories, and audiences adored listening, nodding gravely while sipping their spiced wine. Meanwhile, explorers carried these stories abroad. Italian merchants sailing to the Low Countries told Dutch scholars of a buried city that might be found under the Alps. Spanish sailors carried the rumour across the Atlantic, whispering to conquistadors that perhaps the Americas too hid ancient cities swallowed by earth and jungle. It is not coincidence that tales of the Lost Legion and lost cities travelled at the same pace as galleons. They were cargo of the imagination, easily stowed and widely traded. Historians note that this was also the age of cabinets of curiosity. Wealthy nobles collected fossils, carved gems, and mysteries of the world in display cases meant to awe their guests. A tooth from a whale might be labelled as belonging to a Roman giant. A lump of mineral glittering with pyrite might be displayed as stone from the buried city. Every artifact, real or fake, fed the appetite for wonder, and since no one could provide definite proof, the story of the vanished city was free to expand in any direction, much like dough left too long in the oven. One quirky tidbit repeated in Renaissance letters is that some believed the city's bells could still be heard ringing on stormy nights. Travellers swore that if you stood on a particular hilltop when the wind blew just right, you might hear bronze tolling faintly beneath the ground. Were these simply echoes of cowbells from distant valleys? Likely. But for those inclined to belief, it was confirmation that the city had not died, but only slumbered beneath layers of earth. The Renaissance obsession with symmetry also coloured interpretations. Scholars sketched elaborate diagrams showing the cosmos in balanced circles, within circles geometric perfection, that supposedly governed both stars and cities. According to this view, the sudden swallowing of a city had to mean the balance had been broken. Perhaps the citizens had strayed from virtue. Perhaps they had failed to honour the right gods. Perhaps the stars themselves had shifted, causing the earth to reclaim what was unworthy. Historians still argue whether these interpretations tell us more about the city or more about the Renaissance mind desperate for patterns. Archaeology in any modern sense did not yet exist, but digging did. Farmers turning soil for vineyards occasionally struck foundations tiles or bits of pottery, and the news would reach a local patron who might dispatch a servant to gather relics. These shards often ended up on shelves beside shells from distant seas, given labels more poetic than accurate. A broken amphora might be described as vessel from the doomed feast. A mosaic tile could be called fragment from the banquet hall that sank. The appetite for story ensured that every stone unearthed was seen through the lens of tragedy, and yet even amid exaggeration a thread of seriousness endured. Some Renaissance scholars genuinely tried to cross-reference locations, comparing medieval chronicles with Roman itineraries looking for consistency in the geography. They debated whether the vanished city lay near the Po River, or under the shifting soils of the Rhine, or hidden in the Pyrenean valleys. They rarely agreed, but their debates planted seeds that later generations of archaeologists would water. And through their disputations, the lost city remained alive not only as a myth, but as a puzzle worth solving. As the Renaissance gave way to the early modern era, the tale of the city swallowed by earth became ever more embroidered. Plays depicted its fall, sermons used it as a cautionary tale, and merchants casually invoked it when bargaining. You had better take this deal lest fortune swallow you whole like it did that Roman city. The legend had entered the bloodstream of culture. The city's fate, once a gap in Roman reports, was now an echo in European imagination moulded to fit the desires and anxieties of a new age. It was no longer simply about what had happened, but about what people wished to believe could happen, that the ground itself could judge that empires could falter in an instant, and that mystery like wine grows richer when allowed to breathe through centuries. Enlightenment thinkers arrive with the sharp edges of reason in their hands, eager to cut through centuries of fog. The vanished Roman city, once a legend dressed in mystery, becomes their puzzle, and they insist on approaching it with compass calipers and skepticism rather than candles, charms and whispered prayers. For them, the earth swallowing a city in a single night is an unacceptable absurdity, a fairy tale unworthy of modern intellect. Yet the stubborn absence of evidence nags at them, and so they circle it with questions sometimes as fanciful as those of the monks they scorn. Tonight we slip into salons where wigs are powdered, debates grow heated, and coffee cools beside stacks of maps. The Age of Enlightenment, in all its optimism, could not resist the allure of a mystery that mocked certainty. One philosopher, scribbling furiously, insists that the city must have sunk due to seismic instability. After all, earthquakes had humbled even mighty Lisbon in 1755. If the ground could roar and swallow tens of thousands there, why not one city in distant antiquity? The logic is neat, but the sources are vague. Historians still argue whether Enlightenment rationalism truly clarified the city's fate, or simply reshaped its mystery in the vocabulary of reason. Letters fly across Europe like migratory birds. Gentlemen scholars write each other in elegant Latin, quoting Pliny here, dismissing medieval chroniclers there. They speculate about volcanic activity, about underground caverns hollowing out the soil until it collapsed, about floods, misreported as a single-night catastrophe. Some even suggest that the tale is a mistranslation that swallowed by the earth might once have meant abandoned due to famine. A quirky tidbit appears in one exchange. A natural philosopher argues that sinkholes are the digestive organs of the planet, swallowing what men foolishly build in the wrong places. His metaphor, though odd, is closer to modern geology than he might have guessed. The city also creeps into the grand encyclopedias of the era. Compilers, eager to catalogue every corner of human knowledge, reluctantly include entries about the lost settlement. They phrase them cautiously, hedging with "it is reported" or "some ancient writers affirm." They are torn between their love of rational order and the nagging pull of wonder. In the margins of one surviving encyclopedia, Draft, a frustrated editor, scrawls nonsense but necessary nonsense. Even in the Temple of Reason, mystery sneaks through the side door. Salons buzz with conversations where polite laughter mingles with exasperated sighs. One hostess entertains her guests by reading aloud a passage about druids casting spells to make cities vanish. The gentlemen chuckle, then promptly launch into earnest debate about subterranean water tables. The shift from enchantment to engineering is stark, yet both explanations fail to satisfy. The Enlightenment, for all its brilliance, still could not pin the city down. Beyond the drawing rooms, fieldwork begins. Antiquarians march into valleys with measuring rods and sketchbooks attempting to match ruins to the vanished settlement. Their boots grow muddy, their ink smudges in the rain, and more often than not they mistake medieval barns for Roman basilicas. A mainstream historical fact underlines this. In the 18th century, archaeology was still more hobby than science, more guesswork than method. Whole theories about the city's location were built upon a single coin or a toppled stone wall. Yet enthusiasm drives them onward, their faith in reason no less zealous than a monk's faith in miracles. Coffee houses echo with wagers. Some bet that the city lies beneath a famous lake, others that it hides under farmland tilled for generations. Maps are unrolled, lines are drawn, and bets are settled with pints of ale. A story circulates of one eccentric who marked here lies the city on a map, simply because he liked the shape of the valley. His theory gained followers before collapsing under scrutiny, a reminder that even rational ages have their fashionable delusions. Meanwhile, governments take notice. Imperial administrators wonder whether confirming the city's existence might bolster claims to distant territories. If Rome once stood firmly in those lands, surely their modern heirs could claim authority. A report is commissioned, then shelved, then quietly forgotten, when it yields nothing but muddy boots and expenses. Bureaucracy proves as effective at swallowing effort as the earth itself was said to be at swallowing stone. The Enlightenment also gives birth to skeptics who scoff at the very idea of the city. They argue that it was never real, merely a parable that grew from thin soil into tangled myth. Better to believe in unicorns, one pamphleteer writes, than in a city that vanishes without a trace. Yet the very act of scoffing keeps the legend alive, for ridicule is still attention, and attention is fuel for stories. Historians still argue whether skepticism helped bury the tale, or unintentionally preserved it by making people argue about it. Artists of the period, though more restrained than their medieval counterparts, still dabble in the mystery. Engravings depict orderly Roman streets crumbling into sudden fissures, neat houses tilting like chess pieces, stoic statues tumbling headlong into darkness. The style is rational, almost clinical, but the drama lingers. The paradox of Enlightenment art is that while it strives for accuracy, it cannot resist spectacle. A city disappearing overnight is too tantalizing not to sketch, even if the sketch undermines the artist's own claims of realism. Libraries fill with competing pamphlets, each one promising the definitive solution. Earthquake, flood, sinkhole, mistranslation, invention. Every theory has its champion. A quirky anecdote tells of a scholar who published a book claiming the city had been swallowed not by earth, but by bureaucracy. It was misplaced in archives and thus lost. His satire rings true even today, when misfiled documents can vanish more effectively than natural disasters. Readers laughed, but some quietly suspected he was closer to the truth than he intended. As the century draws to a close, revolutions sweep across nations, and the mystery fades into the background of louder upheavals. Yet it does not disappear. Students still whisper about it, professors still mention it in footnotes, and travellers still gaze at certain ridges with uneasy curiosity. The Enlightenment has explained away much, but not this. The vanished Roman city remains like a candle guttering at the edge of reason's bright hall, refusing to go out. The Age of Reason taught people to distrust miracles and demand evidence. It gave them compasses, measurements, and neat lines on maps. But it also left them with one of history's most unsettling lessons sometimes. Despite all our instruments and clever words, the earth swallows truth whole and does not give it back. And so the vanished city lingers, both mocked and marvelled at a contradiction in powdered wigs and candlelight. The 19th century breathes new life into the mystery, not with compasses and calipers, but with the sweep of imagination and the flourish of ink-dipped pens. The Romantic era, with its hunger for ruins and its love affair with melancholy, cannot resist a city that disappears overnight. Poets, painters, and wandering gentlemen seize upon the tale and drape it in moonlight mist and longing. Where Enlightenment thinkers had sought to clip the wings of wonder, Romantics hand those wings back and bid the legend to soar. Tonight we drift into candlelit studies where poets gaze at storm clouds and imagine ancient cries on the wind. The vanished Roman city becomes more than an archaeological puzzle. It becomes a symbol of fragility of empire undone not by barbarians or politics, but by the inscrutable earth itself. And yes, if you're wondering whether you would have survived such a calamity, the answer is probably not. unless you could outrun a collapsing hillside in sandals while clutching your lunch of stale bread. Painters of the Romantic Age place the city's fate on their canvases. They render sprawling landscapes where broken columns jut from the soil like bones through skin. Storm clouds roll in dramatic swathes of indigo and violet lightning forks across valleys, and in the distance a silhouette of walls half sunk into bogs looms. These images, more theatre than archaeology, resonate with audiences who crave mystery. A mainstream historical fact anchors this: the Romantic movement across Europe celebrated ruins, whether Roman amphitheatres overgrown with ivy or medieval castles crumbling on hillsides. The vanished city slips seamlessly into this aesthetic, a ruin that is perfect precisely because it cannot be found. Writers, meanwhile, embellish the story with passion. Some craft epics where the earth itself rebels against Rome's pride, cracking open to swallow streets whole. Others pen tragic romances imagining lovers separated by the catastrophe, one buried beneath stone, the other wandering forever searching. Historians still argue whether these embellishments preserved cultural memory or merely distorted it beyond recognition. The irony is that distortion itself keeps the story alive. Clarity would have ended it. Travellers add to the myth with every muddy footprint. Gentlemen on grand tours tramp into valleys convinced they will stumble upon the city if they stare long enough at misty ridges. They send letters home describing eerie silences, stones etched with mysterious markings, and shepherds who whisper of Roman ghosts. A quirky tidbit emerges in one account. A tourist insists he heard faint marching beneath his feet, only to discover later that a nearby farmer was driving sheep with rhythmic shouts. Misinterpretation, yes, but also perfect fuel for a mystery already ablaze. The romantic fascination with nature's sublime terrors adds further weight. Earthquakes, volcanoes, storms all become metaphors for human insignificance. The lost city swallowed, without warning, becomes a cautionary tale about mankind's hubris. Painters show figures standing small before immense cliffs. Poets craft verses where the city is likened to Atlantis, and philosophers sigh that nothing endures, not even Rome. The vanished settlement becomes less about logistics and more about existential dread, a mirror for the romantic's obsession with impermanence. In Slon's debate grows more theatrical than factual. One gentleman insists that druids cursed the city into oblivion. Another, more scientifically inclined, argues for underground caverns collapsing. Both are applauded not for accuracy but for drama. The era thrives on spectacle. Historians still argue whether such salons contributed anything to knowledge or merely produced intellectual fireworks without heat. Either way, the conversations ripple through newspapers, journals, and pamphlets feeding the legend. Folklore too mutates under Romantic influence. Villagers tell stories of ghostly Roman processions glimpsed on moonlit nights, armour glimmering pale. Children are warned not to stray too close to certain marshes lest the ground remember its old appetite. In one region, coins unearthed in fields are dubbed soldiers, tears tokens left behind by the buried legion. These quirks, half belief and half entertainment, show how the mystery seeps into daily life, stitched into the fabric of community memory. Archaeology itself takes a romantic turn. Excavations continue, but with more enthusiasm than precision. Gentlemen with shovels dig where they please, convinced that inspiration is as valuable as method. A mainstream fact underscores this: systematic archaeological practices only solidify in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Before then, treasure hunting masquerades as scholarship. Artifacts pulled from soil are displayed on mantles, more curiosities than clues. The lost city becomes less an object of disciplined study and more a canvas for imagination. Poets like to compare the lost city to fallen stars, sudden and vanishing, leaving only streaks of rumour behind. One particularly sentimental piece describes the city as a sigh upon the lips of earth. Readers weep into handkerchiefs, critics roll eyes, and yet the poem endures because sentiment sticks where facts slip. Historians still argue whether the Romantics inflated the city beyond recognition, or simply ensured it was never forgotten. Both might be true. The Romantic era's obsession with ruins spills into tourism. Carriages creak along country roads, carrying visitors eager to stand where the city once stood. Guides point to hills, swamps, or rocky outcrops, declaring them the site with absolute certainty until the next guide points somewhere else. Local economies benefit, mystery becomes marketable. Alehouses rename themselves the Lost Legion Inn or the Vanish Standard. A quirky anecdote tells of one innkeeper who buried a few coins in a field just so he could charge visitors to discover them. Dishonest, yes, but undeniably clever. The Romantics leave behind not answers but atmospheres. They transform the city from a vanished settlement into a timeless metaphor. To them it is not about where or how it disappeared, but about what it means that it did. The city becomes a symbol of fragility of beauty lost too soon of the eternal dance between permanence and oblivion. They do not solve the puzzle, they make it poetry, and as the century wanes, the city continues to haunt minds and manuscripts. The Romantics, with their storms and sighs, give it immortality of a different kind. Facts may fade, evidence may crumble, but poetry clings like ivy, rooting itself deeper with each retelling. The vanished Roman city survives not in stone but in stanzas, in canvases, in whispered legends that feed the soul as surely as bread feeds the body. The 20th century arrives like a flood of light, bringing science, technology and skepticism into corners once filled only with candles and speculation. Yet even in this modern blaze, the mystery of the vanished Roman city persists, refusing to be dissolved by microscopes, radar or satellites. Instead, it adapts, slipping into new languages of inquiry, archaeological reports, historical debates, even pop culture curiosities. The city long gone in body grows only stronger in spirit. Scholars stride into the new century armed with systematic methods. Excavations now follow grids, soil layers are mapped with patience, and artifacts are catalogued with meticulous notes. Wooden tablets unearthed near Roman frontiers reveal daily routines, requests for socks, complaints about beer shortages, orders for supplies. A mainstream historical fact anchors this: the Vindolanda tablets from northern Britain show us how ordinary Roman soldiers lived, and by extension, remind us how much could vanish if whole cohorts disappeared. Yet for all the discipline, for all the careful shoveling, no trench uncovers the city itself. The puzzle refuses to yield. Technology joins the chase. Aerial photography from World War I pilots reveals ghostly outlines of old roads and fortresses beneath fields. Later, ground-penetrating radar scans beneath farmland exposing buried ditches, walls, and foundations invisible to the eye. LIDAR strips away forests to reveal ancient pathways. Each discovery raises hope. Maybe this valley, maybe this ridge, but always the city remains just beyond certainty. Historians still argue whether technology has brought us closer to truth, or merely multiplied the places where absence mocks us. Meanwhile, the legend spills into new arenas. Novelists spin stories of ghostly legionaries marching through fog, their armour clinking faintly in the night. Filmmakers stage dramatic collapses, entire sets built just to crumble into dust as cameras roll. A quirky tidbit, one board game from the early 21st century uses the city as a plot twist, with the Lost Legion suddenly reappearing on the map as if time had only misplaced them. Popular culture proves as hungry for mystery as any monk or romantic poet ever was. Tourism follows close behind. Guidebooks mark probable sites with confident arrows, even when scholars shake their heads. Villages boast of being the city's resting place inns, rename themselves with evocative titles like the Swallowed City Tavern, and museums curate exhibitions featuring coins, helmets and inscriptions under moody lighting. Visitors lean against glass cases, whispering their own theories, delighted that no one can contradict them with final proof. In a sense, the absence has become an industry producing revenue, as surely as Rome once collected taxes. The internet amplifies the noise. Forums bristle with debates where amateur sleuths pore over satellite images declaring they see camp outlines in farmland. Conspiracy theorists post videos claiming political cover-ups, while academics attempt patient rebuttals. One fringe theory insists the city's survivors marched north beyond recorded frontiers and blended with tribes whose descendants carry their blood. Another insists extraterrestrials spirited them away. The digital age proves that while tools change, imagination remains eternal. Historians still argue whether this democratization of speculation enriches the debate or simply buries it beneath noise. Yet the city does not rest only in curiosity. It carries weight in symbolism. To some, it represents the fragility of empire, proof that even Rome, mighty as it was, could lose not just a battle, but an entire place to silence. To others, it is a lesson in humility, a reminder that earth swallows both marble and mud without discrimination. And for dreamers, it is simply the perfect story absence that refuses closure, a stage where imagination can rehearse endlessly. Quirks of modern scholarship keep humour alive. Archaeologists mutter jokes about every lost trowel being evidence of the city, or that each unreturned grant application is another victim swallowed by the earth. In conferences, earnest papers on soil subsidence share time slots with talks about folklore and myth. One scholar deadpans that the city has been relocated to a parallel universe, and earns laughter proof that even in professional halls, mystery inspires levity. And still no final answer emerges. The trenches, the scans, the debates, the stories, none provides closure. The vanished city resists, and in that resistance it thrives. A mainstream fact hammers the irony Roman civilization was obsessed with permanence carving triumphs into stone-building roads to last millennia. That such a city could vanish without a trace is almost a cosmic joke, a crack in the marble facade of eternity. As the 20th century gives way to the 21st, the story continues. Students still scribble notes in classrooms. Tourists still snap photos in misty valleys. Writers still craft novels. Scholars still argue, raising hands in conferences that echo the debates of salons, monasteries, and senate halls. The city has not returned, but it has not left either. It lingers step after step, century after century, marching not in earth, but in imagination. And so we arrive at the close of this tale where fact fades into mystery and mystery hardens into legend. The lost Roman city swallowed in a single night still walks among us, not in stone, but in story, not in ruins, but in questions. Perhaps it always will. Now the pace softens and the edges of the tale blur like mist rising from a quiet river. The soldiers, the streets, the vanished walls let them drift further away, no longer heavy with questions, but light as whispers carried on the evening air. Imagine the city not crumbling, not lost, but resting folded gently into the earth as one folds a blanket at the day's end. Its silence is not cruel, but calming like the hush of a library or the stillness after rain. Take a slow breath. Picture hills soft under moonlight streams murmuring with steady patience and a meadow where nothing stirs except the grass bending in a mild breeze. There is no collapse now, no terror, no debate. There is only quiet, a quiet that asks for nothing and gives everything. In that stillness, the mystery no longer demands answers, it simply offers peace. Let the image deepen. Roads that once bustled with boots now lie smooth, softened by centuries. Cloaks of mist settle tenderly over the land, not hiding but protecting. The people, the stones, the sounds, all are safe, cradled by time. And as you let that picture linger, notice how your own shoulders loosen, how your thoughts slow into a gentler rhythm. The legion has marched its last mile, the city has whispered its last rumour, and you have reached the end of this story. Nothing presses forward now. There is no urgency. Just the simple comfort of knowing that history, like sleep, is a place where we can rest. So let the questions go, let your eyes grow heavy, and let the night carry you into deep, untroubled dreams. Until next time, sweet dreams.